Welcome to the Catholic Leadership Network podcast, helping ministry leaders succeed from the beginning, with your co-hosts, Christy and Sarah Jarzembowski. And there we go. All right. Welcome to the Catholic Leadership Network podcast, where we talk about all those things that nobody talks about in Catholic ministry. Today, you'll notice that I am flying solo. Sarah Jarzembowski, my friend Christy, is taking care of some pastoral needs of a dear friend of hers who lost a parent recently. So she is taking care of her friend today. And I am here on our podcast with John Roberto. Just a giant in Catholic and Christian ministry. John has spent a lifetime working with Christian faith formation, teaching, writing, researching, and consulting, developing program resources. He founded Lifelong Faith Associates in 2006. To continue his work, he served on the leadership team of Vibrant Faith Ministries from 2017 to 2020. John is also the founder of the Center for Ministry Development, where he worked for 28 years. John has a master's degree in religious education from Fordham University and graduate studies in sociology at Catholic University. He's married to Linda, father of 3 married children and a grandfather of 5 grandchildren. And his most recent work is Lifelong Faith, Formation for All Ages and Generations. So excited about this book. John, welcome to our podcast today. So glad you're here.
Thank you. Good to be here, Sarah. Thanks.
Oh my goodness. And this book is really great. Formation for All Ages and Generations. So, let's get kicked off with really what is intergenerational ministry and how can it serve our parishes and our ministries?
Sure. So intergenerational is often thought of as something new, but like in the Catholic world, we can go back into the 70s and 80s when there was a real emphasis on doing what I'll call an alternative or an addition to kind of the weekly age group classes that we were doing with children and teenagers, and that was to bring the whole family or all the generations together. And so sometimes when we talk about family, we think about only parents and grandparents, but parents and children, but add the grandparents, you have 3 generations. So there was a lot of work in the 70s and 80s on more family-centered or intergenerational, not just in the Catholic world, but also in the broader Christian world. That kind of tapered off a little bit because you have to sustain an innovation like that. And then over the last 2 decades, intergenerational has come back as a strong emphasis in faith formation. And I think the particular reason why it's so important today is that more and more the generations are segregated in daily life. I always say, when you think about the typical life of a high school student, most of their life is in peer settings or on large group to one adult settings, but not very thickly intergenerational. And so for those who are a little bit older, they might remember that we grew up in very intergenerational Catholic parishes, often bounded together by a nationality or ethnicity. And there, the intergenerational relationships and sharing was primarily like the hallmark of what that parish was about. 3, 4, 5 generations sharing all together at worship and in festivals and gatherings and socially and community. And that was also reflective of what happened at home. You live relatively close to grandparents or great-grandparents, sometimes in the same house. That's a memory for most people. It's not the lived reality today. We live really more siloed or segregated life. And I think what churches recognized is, while children and teenagers need age group programs, they also need to be connected to the broader community intergenerationally. And so I always emphasize with people that when you think about intergenerational ministry and faith formation, it's not just a program, it's a kind of a continuum of responses really oriented towards how do we build a parish culture of intergenerationality. So how do we really strengthen what we take for granted? Like on Sunday, you see all the generations there, and I say that's really good, but that's an assembly. That's not necessarily intergenerational connections and relationships. So thinking about intergenerational more intentionally. We used to get it free in Catholic parishes. I'm only going back 50 or 60 years. We used to get it for free because people lived in neighborhoods and in intergenerational families and communities. We don't get it for free anymore. So parishes have to really build intergenerational relationships and connectivity So it's got to be intentional. I think the last 20 years, every church, every Christian church, every Catholic parish has really recognized we need to be more intentional about how we bring people together and build relationships, because everybody knows it's the relationships in which faith is transmitted, in which faith is shared, in which faith is lived. If you have no relationships, faith is not going to grow. And so
Mhm.
stronger the intergenerational connections, obviously the stronger the intergenerational faith sharing and faith transmission is.
Mhm. Well, and what is the importance of that intergenerational faith sharing? Like, what is it that, tends to come to light when we have those three generations that are talking about their faith experiences?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of circle around this with a little bit of a history around it.
Okay.
One of the things that when I started in youth ministry 100 years ago, but one of the most formative books, and I think one of the most significant books in youth ministry back in the 70s, was a book that Merton Strawman, the founder of the Search Institute, wrote, called Five Cries of Youth.
Mm.
And in the fifth cry was the cry of the joyous, those were the engaged, and they were teenagers living out their faith and the rest. And one of the things they found is when he interviewed them and asked them on surveys, they all of these teenagers pointed to the fact that they were known by name by five or more adults in their church communities, beyond their family, and that they felt connected to all the other generations. And so I take that insight and say, well, but what's this five or more dynamic? Well, it's been reinforced by studies by Fuller Youth Institute, and
Mhm.
just recently, Springtide Research Institute, in their 2020 report on belonging and teenagers across denominations, what they discovered the same thing, that there was a significant difference in the sense of identity, purpose in life, meaning, and connection between teenagers who had at least three, but when you got over five, there was just a quantitative difference in their sense of connection. So the intergenerational relationships, when we look at the research studies and the rest, not only is it good in terms of growth and development of children and teens, it's also good for the growth and development of the older people, who stay connected to the younger ones.
Mhm.
But in terms of faith transmission, faith is primarily transmitted through lives of faith and
Mm.
stories of faith. And the people in every parish community who carry the stories are the older generations. And
Mhm.
so I love it when like in a teenage confirmation program, teenagers are connected, and I'll call it mentoring, but it's really kind of a spiritual guide, mentor intergenerationally with older adults. And I mean
Mhm.
the 60 plus, I don't mean their parents, I mean their grandparents and great grandparents, because it's a safe relationship space that teenagers can talk openly about their lives with people who just care about them. So
Mhm.
like grandparents may not know what's going on in the lives of the kids, but they care about their kids greatly.
Mhm.
So those that kind of relationship safe space allows people to grow. And I think faith transmission is really enhanced not only by parents, because they're probably the most significant factor in someone coming to faith and living their faith, but also by the grandparent generation, kindred and non-kindred grandparents who are willing to share their faith, accompany, because I love the word accompany young people on their journey, whether it's children or teens, and young adults. I mean,
Mhm.
so I think the myth is that you get to the 20s and 30s, and all my experience, my 20 and 30 kids, were really connected to their grandparents, and I think when you
Mhm.
look at the parish community, they're looking for some mentors and role models, people who have figured out some things in life about career, about faith,
Mhm.
about how to manage finances, how to balance all these things in life, the kind of the life's instruction kit that you don't get anymore. It's the older generation who can help that happen. And people who won't judge you, who just want to be there for you. Um, every Catholic parish has the ability to do this because we have plenty of people 60 and over. And most
Yep.
parishes, they complain, oh, we just have a lot of old people at our church. And I always say to them, can we flip this around and use the half glass full imagery? Without the 60 plus people, you would have no parish, because there'd be no
Yeah.
finance. You'd have nobody on committees, no one coming to Sunday worship,
Yeah.
so don't complain. But every one of those 60 plus people is connected to two or three or four other generations who may or may not be participating in Sunday
Yeah.
worship or in the church. So
Mhm.
let's utilize a rich asset that we have. They're not people who are going to want to say, look, yeah, I'll run the youth group meeting on Monday night. No, they've been there, done that when they were younger. To pray with a group of young people, to pray for young people during like their confirmation process or first youth communion preparation, to be able to provide kind of a mentoring role or accompanying role. They'd be happy to do that because they're not teaching or the program leader.
Yeah.
So the possibilities in a parish for really becoming intentionally intergenerational with the people we already have are really powerful. We do a lot of things. I mean, you will see it now, like all these evangelization campaigns, how to get people back. And I think start with the people who are there, because every one of those parents, grandparents, and great grandparents are connected to parents and kids. And how do we equip and empower them to forge those intergenerational relationships? People come to Sunday worship, not only in the Catholic world, but in the broader Christian world, because of the community, because of the people they know. You know, it's part of their, you know, it's not just about worshiping God, which is very important, but it is about being with people that you know and love. We can do this. I mean, this is kind of the nuts and bolts of parish life and of faith formation, way before any of the other tools, digital and resources. This is the bread and butter kinds of things that we can do.
Yeah, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to go a little bit deeper and flesh this out a little bit more. What are some natural ways that we can bring our generations together? You know, you mentioned prayer for those who are going through sacramental formation. You know, what are some other natural connections where we can start to build this this culture of intergenerational caring and connection?
Sure. When I'm working with, when I'm writing about it or teaching about it or working with a church, I talk about intergenerational as a continuum. So the most in-depth would be like structuring intergenerational learning programs, intergenerational service programs, you know, like, so programs that are designed from the bottom up as intergenerational. But that's along the continuum. The first one is to recognize that multi-generational gatherings are not intergenerational. And what I mean by that is, because I've got a couple of generations together. So I have a couple of generations together at the parish picnic. It doesn't mean they're talking to each other. It doesn't mean they're sharing with each other. It doesn't mean that they're connecting with each other. However, if at the parish picnic, I do just maybe some silly games that are age friendly. Okay, so like they're not games that only teenagers could play or children play. It builds relationships. So the parish picnic is about the parish celebrating. We're together, we're going to eat food together. But the activities, the games, the leadership roles can be very intergenerational, and they can begin to build relationships. So if any parish looked at the 12 months of their calendar and think about all the gatherings, how can I just add some intentional intergenerational relationship connection? Maybe it's around a prayer, maybe it's a community builder, maybe it's who's in leadership roles, different ages working together to serve a meal or prepare a meal. Like, so it's, I often say, it's not that we don't have the opportunities. They're there dotted across the 12 months of the year. It's that we have to bring the intergenerational and say, how do I connect the generations? Through the activities, how do I connect the generations in leadership roles? How do I make every generation feel welcome? Which means I have to have a facility that is conducive to both children and to grandmas and grandparents who have a walker or have a cane. You know, like, it's when you think that big, all of a sudden things start to happen. And so you don't have to program everything. You have to create the right opportunities and experiences. So that's, every church can do that. Every church can look at Sunday worship and say, how do I get different generations in leadership roles at the worship service? So whether it's music or reading, lecturing, or Eucharistic ministers don't have to be 75 years old. There's no age thing. They have to be confirmed, but that means 15 or 16 and up, right? So, like, if we started thinking that way, we would break down some of these barriers. We're always looking for more people to be involved in leadership. So I think we have to model what we want people to experience. And so if worship models multiple generations in liturgical roles, if our gatherings model different people in important roles in the gathering and models different activities, the presenters model a couple different generations, even if a younger generation participating has a more limited role as they grow into it, that's fine, because the visuals need something. I think that those are easy starting points. If I'm a children's program director, children's catechesis or youth ministry, how do I integrate another generation into my programming? Like, so the myth is, oh, teenagers only want to be with teenagers. They're with teenagers all day long. Give them a break. I mean, they're always with their age group. It's not like they're not with their age group. They're 7 hours a day, plus the extracurriculars and all the rest. They're always with their age group. If they're working at McDonald's, they're with their age group. Can I bring a panel? We're doing, we're looking at biblical stories and part of our program. Can I bring a panel in that's a couple of older adults? Can young people interview some of the older adults in their own family to bring to the next, so there's just ways to bring another generation involved into a program. We're always looking to expand our base of volunteer leaders in our programming. We have to be sensitive to what you can expect people 16 and over to do, what roles, but there's always multiple roles. And the more young people just rub shoulders, I don't even talk about programming, just rubbing shoulders with the generations helps build relationships. So we can infuse that into our existing programming relatively easily. We can transform, keep on moving along the continuum. We can transform what we do. So over the course of a year of even in a parish where I work with people, all we do, we have our age group program, and we meet weekly, I said, well, what if 3 times a year, just 3 times, you had a festival and you invited grandparents, and you had parents and grandparents and the kids for an Advent festival, a Lenten festival, a Pentecost festival. Heck, even schools do that. They invite parents for a Thanksgiving dinner, or they invite them to the concert, that kind of stuff. What if you just did 3 times a year where you don't have to transform all your programming all at once, though I think it'd be a good thing to think about more family-centered programming, right? And more intergenerational programming. But you can splice into your weekly program 3, 4, 2 opportunities where you bring other generations to interact with the children. People worry about safety and all that kind of stuff. And I think, look, if parents are there with their kids in a large setting, you're not worried about, child safety and that kind of stuff. You've got control over that. So it's just a different model. But you can easily take it. So without redoing my whole program this year, I can find right now, I could find 2 or 3 things that we can do to incorporate that. And then eventually as you move through, some programs become intergenerational to their core. It's the parish that's been doing a mission trip service programming with teenagers for years, and all of a sudden decides to take one of those and make it intergenerational. Youngest 10, oldest 80, and all of a sudden now you have an intergenerational mission trip with age-appropriate activities in it that could be transformative, not only for the people, but for the whole community. So, as you move along the continuum, and then of course I work with churches, excuse me, that really build intergenerational learning. Their primary model moves from kind of the age only to intergenerational and or family-centered as well as age groups. So they blend that. But intergenerational learning is a great format. We eat together, we pray together, we learn together, we share scripture together, and we have 2 or 3 hours in which we're together with each other. And over the course of a year, if you did that 6, 7, 8 times, you'd start building intergenerational community with people. So anywhere along that continuum, just start somewhere, but be intentional, have a plan. It's, it's really hard to tell parish, it's not one activity, it's the cumulative effect of all these things over years. And you build kind of an intergenerational culture in your parish community.
Well, and one of the things that you mentioned is that non-judgmental attitude of all of the generations, any of the generations. I think people don't realize how judgmental they are in conversations, or how judgmental some of their words are, or their tone is. So how do we have that conversation? Is that a conversation? How do we train up, open up that space to make it a little bit more safe?
Yeah, I think some of it is just unintentional stereotypes, uh,
Mhm,
and some of it's displeasure, and some of it's just threatening to older
mhm,
generation. I don't know how else to describe that, and vice versa sometimes. Um, the I think the key. So I said this to a group once, and they kind of looked at me and said, if everybody in this if all the older adults in this parish treated children like they were their grandchildren, wouldn't the whole parish community change? Like, you know,
mm,
I said, I don't, I mean, like, so I said, I'm a grandparent. I said, I'm never judgmental about my grandkids. I'm just fascinated by them. Even when they do stupid things, I'm fascinated by them. Kind of like, well, tell me more about that. It's like, um, you're fascinated, you're inquiring, like your first stance is to learn, to listen, right?
mhm,
I said, what if our first stance was just with each other, just to learn and listen? It's just simple. And so you start with this basic attitude of respect for the dignity of each person. I
mhm,
mean, which is the core of Catholic morality and Catholic social. I mean, without that, you'd have nothing, right? Um, and I just think people, like, if every parish council meeting was built around the principle of just respecting for the diversity of opinions, whether you agree with it or not. I mean, you could, in a safe space, you could say, I disagree with that, without being like, you are just the worst person in the galaxy, kind of thought, right?
mhm,
Uh, I think we have to have social norms in all of our community life. And those social norms have to be reinforced by the leaders. And so oftentimes, and we see this in our broader society, when leaders don't hold up social norms, things go off the rails really quick. Um,
mm,
so in a parish community, I'd say one of our social norms, our first move is to respect the dignity of each person, to have an attitude of fascination, um,
mm,
of listening and learning before we come to any conclusion. Um, it's so funny. This goes back a few years, so it's a safer example. But the stereotypes you'd make about kids who had a lot of tattoos on their body,
mhm.
like, it tells you absolutely nothing except they went to a tattoo parlor. I mean, that it doesn't.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't tell you about their faith, their spirituality, their outlook on life, their sense of altruism. It doesn't tell you anything, right? It just
Mhm,
is. And so, kind of an attitude would be, well, tell me about this. Like, what's that symbol all about? Like,
mhm,
so if people could be a little bit more fascinated and inquiring, I think that works. Intergenerationally, it's just respecting people's stories and their history, um,
mhm,
and being open to what they have to share. A parish, and then consequently all of its programs, needs to have some norms of behavior. I just mean,
mm,
this is how we act with each other. This is what the gospel asks us to do. And so the gospel: respect, listening, treasuring and valuing the other person. Jesus is fascinated by people, and people are fascinated by him. But
mhm.
he's always got, like, if you could only see him in some of the gospel stories, he'd have a twinkle in his eye, like, okay, so who are you? Like, so, and why are you coming to me? Like, I
Mhm.
just think that the centurion was in recent gospel readings, and I think, here's somebody Jesus must be saying, you're a Roman centurion. Like, what is it? Like, what do you want from me? Like, I would love to just be able to just take a glimpse of what a centurion, really, me?
Yeah,
Um, his fascination with people and love for people just comes across in all the gospel stories. And so,
yeah.
he has no use for people who are judgmental, however.
Right,
He's very
right.
clear about that. But
Yeah.
it's very, and I just think, if we brought into every conversation that kind of respect for people, openness,
Mhm,
listening, fascination, tell me more about that, which is
mm,
that's my favorite focus group question when I'm doing focus groups. Tell me more about that, you know, tell me why it's important to you. Like, tell me the story behind that. It's good for children and it's good for 90-year-olds.
mhm,
Everybody responds well for that. And I think the beauty of what I've seen in intergenerational learning programs is that it provides an environment where you can do that, a safe space. We just need to create more safe spaces. I
yeah,
think teenagers especially need to be in safe spaces with, other adults who are there just for them, meaning
yeah.
it's safe to share. I have a chance to do Catholic school assessment visits with the Christian Brothers on a whole bunch of their schools in the
Mm.
San Francisco, New Orleans district. And so I get a chance to interview students, and I get a chance to interview the faculty. And the highest compliment the kids can give to their school is when they say, this school feels like a family and it's safe.
Mm.
Safe. And what they mean by safe is they don't mean physical safety, though that's obviously implied, but they mean psychological safety.
Mm.
And we always ask them about their religion classes, right? Because, you know, poor religion classes get beat up all the time, right? And one of the schools, the kids were just so articulate. We can express how we think and feel about whatever the religious topic is. And one of the students said, it doesn't mean we're right, but we get a chance to express that. I thought, oh my goodness, I want to take you around on the road with me, right? He said, our religion teachers want us to express that, and then they will share with us whatever the particular knowledge or content is, but we feel safe expressing it because we're never judged by what we've said. We're always, people will explore it, people will push back, but it's not like you know, they think I'm wrong, you know? And I just thought that's what definition of a safe space. I'm valued for who I am as a person. You may not agree with an opinion or a belief or whatever, but I'm valued as a person.
I love that word, fascinating. You've brought that up a couple of times, and I'll never forget the first time somebody just looked at me and said, tell me about yourself. I'm just so fascinated. And I was floored because this person's kind of a higher up and a bigwig in the Catholic Church, you know, one of those that you kind of see from afar, which I used to do with you. And I'm like dying that I'm sitting here talking to you, you know, and this person just looked me in the eyes and said, tell me about you. You're fascinating. And that feeling, it felt like a safe space at that moment.
Yeah.
It felt like I was important for who I am, and very specifically me. And that was just a really, I will never forget that moment. It was just eye-opening. And I think that people don't think that they're fascinating. You know, people think that they're just like anybody else, and I'm not a big deal, but we are in our own right. We are fascinating, and we are special and unique. And, you know, having that place to explore those kinds of each other's stories, I think is really great. We're actually going to talk to Timone Davis in a couple of weeks. I'm not sure if you know Timone, about storytelling. She just wrote a book on storytelling in our faith setting. So I'm glad you brought that up, because, you know, I think that having other people of the parish, intergeneration, multi-generational, to share their stories when we gather, I think is helpful for people to be able to put words to their own story. And when we put words to our own story, we start to really see how God is moving in our lives.
Yeah.
You know?
One church community, an Anglican church that I was at a workshop with, decided they wanted to do video interviews of their oldest members to their youngest members. So they started with 5 or 6 members who had helped found the church, and they were all in their 80s or 90s. And these are they put these interviews right on the church website. And they were lucky they did. 2 died before they got them onto the website. But now they have their living witness of what the church means to them, what God means to them, how they live their life, what they've learned. I mean, I'm thinking every church can do this. I mean, all you have to do is get the middle school kids ready to go to do the video recording, right? The stories, it's kind of like the StoryCorps concept, you know, that, you know, one person interviewing another person. Imagine us doing that in a parish community, and all these stories being available on Facebook or on our website, in all these platforms in audio format. It creates the climate that you want, in terms of people feeling, I can share where I am in my walk with God, and it's safe. I can share, and I can share where I am in my life of faith, and that might help somebody. That might strengthen somebody, affirm somebody. All intergenerational. So when people say what's intergenerational, I say it's a big tent is intergenerational, and
Yeah.
programming is a piece of that.
Yeah, I love that. You know, you mentioned founders of parishes. We have a fairly young parish, 46 years old. So we have a lot of, I mean, we have a lot of founders still. They are of retirement age. And so I'm wondering, how do we involve the younger generations in the leadership without the older generation feel like they're being left behind? That's something that I'm starting to hear is, you know, the older generation wants to bring in young people, but when we do bring in young people, they're hurt because they want to do it a different way.
Right.
And they're founders. And so it's very ingrained in who they are and who the parish is to do it this way.
Yeah.
So, you know, how do we work in that kind of a dynamic?
Yeah, it's the hardest thing because you have highly invested people who are in their 60s, 70s, have given a lot to the church, and change feels like they did something wrong,
Ooh.
or it's not working. And so what I often try to, it's very hard to communicate this, and so you just have to say it over and over again. Adapting what we're doing to the current context does not say it didn't work 10 or 20 years ago. And I say that all the time with our faith formation programming. What worked with children in the 70s and 80s and 90s may not work in the 20s and 2010s and 2020s. So it's very contextual. The other thing to think about is that, so younger generations, when you say, would you like to join a committee, they can't run for the door fast enough. Right? Committees are where people go to die. Like it just, and you can't make a short-term commitment to a committee. It has to be a lifetime commitment, right? So I think in every church community, we should expand the leadership opportunities. And so I often say, if you're not getting catechists to volunteer in your catechetical program, maybe the problem isn't catechists, maybe the problem is the program.
Ooh.
Maybe they're actually sending you a message that, no, I can't make a 30-week commitment the same day every week, and it's not fun,
Yeah.
So maybe they're telling us something by what they want to be involved in. So I would flip the script. I would say we have talent, and I'll focus on 20 and 30 somethings for the moment, but this would also apply to teenagers. You come with gifts and talents, interests and passions. You see some things. What do you want to do? How do we expand the ministry lineup? And how do I build it around what young adults would love to see the church do? Well, let's form a task force or whatever they want to call it. Just don't call it a committee. And so maybe they want to organize something in terms of, well, we're really passionate about climate. We got to go on climate. Okay, got it. We're really passionate about thinking about spirituality in its broader sense, and let's go with that. So they may be involved. They may want to take leadership in areas that the 60 plus people are not. That's just not their interest, because it's more age focused than the. And the other thing is, they may not want to be part of some of these legacy programs. I don't know how else to describe it. Legacy ministries. They may want to reinvigorate it. So it's not a problem saying we're going to have another expression of this. Where there's an opportunity for partnering, what you have to set some ground rules in sense of that if we're going to have a discussion about planning or next year, then it's got to be a discussion that's open. You can't have decided what you want next year and then have a committee meeting after you've decided what you want to do, which I call church decision making. We decided last night, and we'll have a planning meeting today to tell you what we decided last night. That's not planning. So young adults may not want to be part of those kind of meetings, but if they do, they've got to be invited in a way, and this is a leadership question, obviously, in a way that says, you're going to bring new perspectives to this. You're going to think about this differently. And so I think expanding wherever you can, the opportunities for people to be in leadership is a good thing. I think I'll share a really quick story. I was doing a workshop for a Presbyterian parish that anchored for decades in Sunday morning Bible study. That was an anchor. An adult Bible study on Sunday morning from 9:30 to 10:30, between the 8 o'clock worship service and 11 o'clock worship service. And so I'm talking about all this, the trends in, faith formation, how to be thinking about how do you reach new generations and the rest. And so the first question is, how do we get more young adults to our Sunday morning Bible study? I said, well, what time do you do Bible study on Sunday morning? 9:30 or 10:30? Where are most of the 20, 30 somethings in your parish on Sunday morning at 9:30? Silence in the group. I said, can I answer that myself? I said, in bed. So why don't you do Sunday morning Bible study like on Monday night or Wednesday night or Friday night, and maybe the cafe or the pub, and then one of the responses was, well, then it wouldn't be Sunday morning Bible study. No, it would not be Sunday morning Bible study, but it would be Bible study. Take the Sunday off. It would be Bible study. And so I think that's my little window into how do you, so if we have a leadership team that's organizing our Bible studies in our church, then you have to be open to the fact that Sunday morning is option 1, and Wednesday night's option 2, and the pub on Friday night is option 3, et cetera, et cetera. At home is another option. So put the value on the goals or the focus of your ministry, not the expression or the way you've done it before, and expand that. So if it's working for this group on Sunday morning, for example, can it work for other groups at other times of the day or week? And it's Bible study. So we want people to grow in love with the Bible and read. Well, it doesn't, if you're focusing on the book of Revelation this year, that may not appeal to everybody. I have a pretty good hook it doesn't. But this particular book, maybe it's a prophet, you look at prophetic literature, we'll go to Isaiah or Jeremiah this year, or we're going to pray the Psalms, so offer some variety under the umbrella of we're a church, especially a Presbyterian church, we're a church that loves the Bible and God's word, and we want to go deeper in that. That's your goal. It isn't the goal to get people to Sunday morning. And that's the hardest thing, Sarah, is that to move people away from the program to the goal. What do you want to accomplish in the lives of people? What do you want to see flourish in their life? There's lots of paths to help that happen. But if your focus is how do we get young adults or any group to this particular program, that program may be reaching the audience you sought out to reach. Focus back on the goals and say, how do we do these goals with different ages? So the Bible, that Bible story, that story's gonna be 10 years old, and every time I say it, I just laugh out loud, But it wouldn't be Sunday morning Bible study. You're absolutely right; it would not be Sunday morning. But it would be Bible study. It was Bible study.
I think it's really hard for people to think outside those boxes, and it does take time and patience and continuing to affirm the good work that has been done. It's not failure. Change is not failure. No. Adaptation is not failure.
And it doesn't mean you have to stop what you're doing. You usually get to expand it to reach other audiences, So like I said to them, don't stop what you're doing. These people are coming and they've loved being part of this. Just expand other Bible study opportunities. You can multiply that example all across parish communities.
Thank you so much for your time today. We kind of blew past our end time because it was so great. And, John, I could listen to you all day. I have, we've had some great conversations just over this last year and a half, really. I would love to invite you back onto our podcast again in the future. I would love to introduce you to Christy. And so thank you for joining us. John's current book is Lifelong Faith, Formation for All Ages and Generations. There's some really great ideas in here, things to consider, and resources are just really wonderful. So thank you for this gift of a book, John. And we'll be back next week with Christy returning. And we hope you guys have a really great weekend, and we will see you again next week. Take care, everybody.
Bye all.